tramping to class in subarctic temperatures, fighting for books at Hillis Library, cramming for exams.
Oh, baby, baby, it's a wild world.
I met her first day of freshman year at Harvard. She was 16, I was 18.
She was quiet, she was studious, she made a small circle of friends, but this was 1969, and 6 months of her arrival, all the dorms went co-ed.
We were in the same dorm. She talked a lot about her own family. We have a lot in common. Benazir comes from a political family. She was very interested in politics, was interested in the world.
Not only was she becoming a grown-up, but she was independent for the first time, and her life was under her control, and no one else could control it, not mommy, not daddy, just Benazir.
This was the height of the Vietnam War, and she saw firsthand the power of the people to change a policy and to bring down a government.
She was very much exposed to the ideas of equal rights for women, and that was something that very much influenced her life.
It was the first time that I was in an environment where women were treated as full participants in society. It was that early experience, perhaps more than anything else, that shaped my political being.
India and Pakistan, of course, have fought numerous wars, but I think none was more bitter than the War of 1971.
India dismembered Pakistan, it split East and West Pakistan becoming Bangladesh.
The loss was a humiliation to Pakistan. Not only had their geography changed, but their national sense of self was changed.
East Pakistan was a part of Pakistan, made with our own blood and our own sweat. If India thinks that she's rubbing Pakistan nose to the ground, and that Pakistan can come to a settlement in the way that she's behaving and has behaved in the past, that will then not bring about agreement. There will be endless bloodshed and confusion and chaos.
Bhutto was immediately rushed to the United Nations to negotiate peace with India.
It was great drama for the UN in its relatively young phase.
Yesterday, my 11-year-old son telephoned me from Karachi, and he said to me, "Do not come back. It's a document of surrender. We do not want to see you back in Pakistan if you come like that. We will fight. We'll go back and fight. My country hearkens for me. Why should I waste my time here in the Security Council? You can take your Security Council. Here you are. I'm going."
The UN was not going to intervene on the side of Pakistan. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto made it very clear that Pakistan would not surrender. He didn't come to New York to surrender. That propelled him into a very strong national figure.
Bhutto could rally the masses, mesmerize the masses.
He formed Pakistan People's Party. To form Pakistan People's Party, he had a very simple, very popular slogan: food, clothes, and shelter. People of Pakistan were hurting because of the poverty, lack of education. There was no hope of prosperity.
Bhutto just swept the polls. People were waiting for change.
People who chanted the meaning of Pakistan is food, clothing, and shelter won the elections with massive majority.
He was the leader. Every organization, army, everybody was supporting him throughout.
He moved rapidly to make peace with India. Certainly his greatest diplomatic triumph was the Simla Accords.
I met Mrs. Gandhi in 1972 when I accompanied my father to Simla. I was wearing my first sari, and I was very concerned that I might trip over the sari and it would come undone in front of all the international photographers.
I provided the interest in India. So much newspaper coverage, people wanted to do interviews with me. I was quite overwhelmed. And I remember my father called me one morning and said, "Have you seen these pictures of yourself? You look like Mussolini there. You better be careful."
This was a negotiation in which he didn't have very many cards. After all, India was the victorious power. But using his diplomatic skills, which allowed for the return of some 95,000 Pakistani prisoners of war, reestablished normal relations between the two countries. This was very much a formative experience for Benazir. She watched her father operate. She had a diplomatic role as his hostess, and she absorbed many of his lessons of diplomacy.
My father always said, "My daughter will make me more proud than Indira made her father." So my father always had the idea that I was a chip off the block.
When we were both in England, and I was at Cambridge, she was at Oxford. I was struck from the first moment I met her by her force of life.
She was very much into the sort of undergraduate student environment, whereby she just had lots of friends.
She loved entertaining, she loved having fun.
I remember one year she'd chosen to have an invitation with written in gold, "Darling, what would the party be without you?"
Harvard was a place where she could really be herself. She wasn't in the limelight. At Oxford, there was a large Pakistani community. She was older, and I think she was thinking about her future career.
It was assumed that she would not go into politics. She did an interview shortly as she was to leave Oxford. The headline was, "No politics for the president's daughter." But at the same time, she had her eye on what was going on in Pakistan.
In 1974, India detonated a nuclear explosion. And so now Pakistan faced India that was 8 times the size and which had nuclear weapons.
Once India got the bomb, the Pakistani military started clamoring, telling Bhutto, "We want nuclear weapons. Otherwise, how can we compete with the Indians?" Bhutto made this famous speech, "We will build the nuclear bomb," he announced in public, "even if we have to eat grass for 1,000 years.
Bhutto was persuaded by the Ford administration not to go this path.
Dr. Kissinger actually was a friend of my father's and respected him greatly, and he tried to warn him as a friend. So he said, "I don't want you to be made a horrible example of, and so you should not develop the nuclear device."
But that didn't quite work with Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. It was the nuclear power that essentially broke down Zulfikar Ali Bhutto and the West.
The whole of the West was very, very anti-Pakistan because they thought we were doing an injustice. It was a bad situation.
Like all great charismatic leaders, Bhutto had flaws, he had great strengths but great weaknesses, and very soon he was in trouble with the establishment, with even the people of Pakistan.
His allies became his opponents himself. He started losing traction with everybody who was part of his victory.
Her father had chosen to call elections. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto was re-elected. They were contested, and a massive agitation started in Pakistan.
All this turmoil in Pakistan, protests on the street, big rallies against Pakistan People's Party.
He panicked.
He didn't do enough to spread Islam in the country, to appease the mullahs, if you will.
So he thought he would outflank them by pushing through reforms or demands that they wanted. He made Friday the national holiday, not Sunday. He banned alcohol in the country.
His agenda was too wide and too spread out. The large, huge alliance that he had, that pretty much crumbled down.
I'm not arrogant. I would hate to be arrogant or to consider myself to be arrogant. But certainly I am intolerant of certain stupid things.
When you have power and there's only you and you think you're more intelligent than the rest of the country, that's always a mistake.
Because it was my father's birthday. That night there was a dinner in honor of my father. I was told, "Come and meet the new chief of staff, General Ziaul Haq."
selected and kept as the Chief of Army Staff because he was the least threatening general in Pakistan Army. At least that's what Bhutto thought.
My father depended heavily on the reports of inter-services intelligence. They said this choice would make the army very happy.
He frog-leaped Zia over the heads of 5 other generals. Zia was, on the face of it, very humble. That's the phrase often he used, I am your humble servant. And Bhutto was taken in by this show of deference. And then what had to happen, happened.
मिस्टर भुट्टो की हुकूमत खत्म हो चुकी है सारे मुल्क में मार्शल लॉ नाफिज कर दिया गया है कौमी और सूबाई असेंबलियां तोड़ दी गई हैं सूबाई गवर्नर और वजीर हटा दिए गए
General Zia-ul-Haq seized power in April 1977. Basically, there was a general election. Bhutto would have won that election, but his overzealous supporters in the state apparatus rigged that election, which created the atmosphere which permitted the military to come back in. With the green light given by the US, Henry Kissinger had said to Bhutto, we will make a horrible example out of you.
The charges that were brought against Zulfikar were never proven. They were not warranted. And so this was basically to get rid of him. And then after that, the troubles began for the family.
I was in my 3rd year in university. My brothers had to go back to school. My mother and my father said, even if they try and take you off the plane, if they do whatever, don't, under any circumstances, come out of the airplane. Just stay there and go and finish your education.
He was concerned particularly for the boys, for their safety.
I never knew what was happening to my family. I never knew what was happening to my father. My brother was in Oxford, so I used to go and try and visit him.
They didn't have that proximity over that last 1 year, which Benazir had with her father. Week after week, she'd go to jail to see him, and it was during that period she had these very intense conversations with him about leadership and about the people.
Once her father was toppled and imprisoned, she now became very engaged.